Good morning, everybody. It's your boy D Mac. So let's talk. In this climate that we're living in, the way that the United States is going right now, we've experienced so much racism for such a long time, and people out there will deny that racism still exists and is still thriving in this country, even though we have every example of racism being thrown in our face daily. And I just wanted to go over some specific experiences that I've had in my life of racism. This is for all of those people who say that racism does not exist. And so they try to get you to discredit yourself by not being able to pinpoint any specific racist acts that were done to them maliciously. And so right now, what I'm attempting to do is break down different specific racial experiences that I've dealt with from the time I was little up until now. And I'll just go ahead and get started. The first, really the first time that I can remember hearing a racial slur or being introduced to racism, I was in the second grade, and there was a young man. He was an albino kid. His name was Terry. Wherever you are, Terry, salute to you, man. I hope you picked up better habits than this one. But we were out on the playground and we were doing something. I can't recall what we were doing. And Terry got angry and he called me a nigger. And I was like, I've heard this term at home, but I've heard it as a term of endearment. And I just waved it off as that because I've never heard it in a malicious tone spoken towards me or anybody around me at that time in my life. But remember, I was only in the second grade. And so when he said it, and the way he said it, it didn't feel like it did when I would hear it at home and in other places around black people. And, that was my first experience. And I went home. I remember going home, and my brother was a few grades higher than me. And on the way home, I was telling him about it, and he was ready to fight this kid. And I couldn't understand why he wanted to fight the kid because of that word that we use all the time at home. And we said it in a playing fashion, and it wasn't harmful to us. So I was confused about why my brother was really angry and wanted to fight this kid. And that was my first experience with racism and being called a racial slur. The second time, I was in third grade the following year, and we were having a class party or something like that, and we were doing I forget the name of the game, but it's where you describe something that you see, and everybody else has to point out what you're describing. I believe it's I Spy or something like that. And so one of the kids, Tony Thomas, I'll never forget these kids' name because these are things that stand out in my life. And salute to Tony as well, because later on me and Tony became friends, and Tony had some mental issues that back in the 80s, we didn't deal with mental health very well. And we didn't have any clue about kids dealing with mental health issues, especially in elementary school. And so Tony was in our regular class, and we were playing this game. And so Tony said, "What's black all over with 3 holes in it?" And everybody's looking around and everybody's trying to figure it out. And finally he said "Kunta," and everybody started laughing, even the teachers. And I can remember the feeling of embarrassment, the feeling of anxiety, the hurt, and all of those things from that. And I know Tony didn't mean that in a malicious way. I hope he didn't mean it in a malicious way. But the fact that everybody laughed at me, now I know how Dave Chappelle feels when he said people weren't laughing at his jokes. He felt like they were laughing at him as a person. And when that type of ridicule and stuff happens to a child, it really, really bears your self-esteem. And so that was my second experience with racial slurs and racism. And it started to affect me at that point, because after having that talk with my brother from the previous situation that happened with Terry, I had a little bit better understanding that there are people out here who will intentionally hurt you because of what they've been taught and what they believe about you, because they buy into stereotypes. And so for a while after that, third, fourth, fifth, all of those grades passed by. Well, I've come to the age of 14 to where I can get a summer job. There was a program called the JTPA summer program, and you get a job working at these different places. Well, the place where I got my summer job was my former elementary school, of all places. How about that? And so I was working with the custodian and his assistant for the summer, just buffing the school floors, maintaining the property, things like that, to earn my money to buy my school clothes going into middle school. And so I was working with this gentleman, and we were talking about heritage, and I was saying that my brother was Native American. He was part Native American. And mind you, this is a white man and a white woman. And they were like, they kind of giggled to each other and looked at each other, and they was like, oh yeah, well, what tribe? And I said, the Blackfoot tribe. And this grown man came out of his mouth to a 14-year-old black boy and said, more like Niggerfoot tribe. And man, I ain't even gonna lie, I froze in that moment. I was just so shocked that this person would come out of their mouth and say that type of thing to a kid, man. And they really don't understand, or they do understand, and they meant to hurt me in such a way, man. But after that, the rest of the summer, I did my work, but I didn't sit and talk with them no more, because, man, if I would have had better sense back then, I should have said something, and maybe we could have gotten some type of resolution from this. But I wonder how many more people he did like that. And now I see what his true thoughts about black people were. But that's something that really, really jarred me. And that's where I began to become the outspoken person that I am, and started to read up on a lot of things so that I could understand, because I never wanted to be caught in that type of situation again without any type of response. I could have said something crazy back to them and I would have lost my job. I could have tried to fight them and I would have lost my job and probably caught a charge or something like that. But I know I didn't want to be unprepared anymore after that. And that launched me into intense reading and studying outside of what school requires us to do, so that I can have a better understanding, so that I ever get placed in that position again, that I would be able to handle myself and speak for myself and not feel so helpless in those moments. And that was the third instance of racism that I dealt with in my life. Now, as I got older, I was about 16 or 17 years old, and I was at home. I was just chilling, minding my own business. Well, I ain't gonna lie, I was smoking a joint, sitting there chilling, and there was a knock on the door. And so I came to the door and I opened the door, but I had the joint in my hand behind the door, and it was two police officers. And I was like, yeah, can I help you? And they just grabbed me by my wrist and was like, come on, Cedric. It's like, Cedric. My neighbor's name is Cedric. Now, mind you, where we lived at in Harrisburg, North Carolina, my closest neighbor was about a quarter of a mile away. I lived on a private road, and the end of the road was where my house was. So you're not going to just see cars coming up and down my road. They have to come down that road with an intent and a purpose where they've been called or something like that. And so, they grabbed me by my wrist and they tried to drag me outside down the stairs and calling me Cedric and saying I need to come on and stuff like that. And I'm telling these guys, I'm not the person you're looking for. My name is not Cedric. You are at the wrong house. You can see the numbers on the house right here. So if they would have taken the time just to look up, they would have seen that this address is not the address of Cedric Govan, unless he gave them a false address or something whenever he got in his trouble. And so, as they tried to drag me down the stairs, I dropped my joint. And I was a pretty stout kid, man. I was 16, 17 years old. I've been playing, I've been boxing for a while, and I've been playing football and other sports. So I was pretty cock diesel back then. And as they tried to fumble with me and put the cuffs on my wrist, I kind of crossed my arms over. And when I crossed my arms over, they got entangled with each other and they ended up falling on the ground. So the scene is this: I'm standing over these officers with one cuff on one hand, and it looked like I'm holding both of them down. So my mother comes out and she says, this is not Cedric. What are y'all doing? And went into her thing. And once they realized that they were wrong, they got up, took the cuff off, didn't apologize, and went to Cedric's house. And I'm like, what just happened here? That could have ended up so bad in today's climate. Today's time, I probably would have been shot to death instantly. As I started to struggle with them, and whenever they felt like they were losing ground, they could have easily pulled their weapon and shot me and said that I did something. And like I said, I have no neighbors, so there would have been no witnesses out there to the story, and they could have completely covered it up. But I thank God that he was watching over me in that instance, and that didn't happen. And so those officers left, man, and I began to get bitter from that point. I was already a little teed off about what had happened to me a couple of years before with this guy that I was working with and calling my brother Niggerfoot Indian. And this right here started to make me resentful. This is the seed had already been planted, but now it's being watered by these police officers. And so my next instance was in high school. It was a principal that I had named Mr. Lentz. And Mr. Lentz, I'll say this: Satan always comes in the form of an angel of light. He never comes in his original form, because he knows you're going to throw your guard up instantly and his effectiveness won't be as potent. And so he's going to come as an angel of light to get your guard down so that he can come in and and do whatever he's going to do in your life. And so Mr. Lentz was our principal of our high school, and he was a very racist gentleman. And he was very subtle with his racism because he didn't want to get called out by a parent or anything. And I'm not going to name the high school, but everybody knows me and knows the high school that I attended. To this day, this very day, this high school is still a very racist school. And it was 2 years ago, 2 black children had to get their parents involved in a situation where some more of their class members had went online and started to say a whole lot of racial slurs and racial things about the children and people at that school. And it was a big thing in that town. But back in those days, it was even the principals, and he was very subtle with his racism. And I remember his son played on our football team, and a lot of us black guys, we asked him, "Is your dad racist?" He said, "Yeah, my dad say nigga all the time." And ultimately, my last clash with Mr. Lynch was I got suspended from school for something earlier that day, but they didn't send me home. And so after school, instead of going home, I went to an after school event. And Mr. Lynch saw me, and it seems like he had pleasure in trying to put me out of the school. And there was another teacher, a black teacher named Kenneth Probst. Salute to you, Mr. Probst. He asked me what was going on, and I told him what was going on. And Mr. Lynch tried to, fluff it up and tried to make it seem good and seem like he was in the right. And Mr. Probst told me, "Hey, go ahead and go on, Mac." And I don't know what happened after that, but that made me even more jaded. And after this will be my last point. I have a few more that have happened since then because I'm much older now, but these are the things that started to build me up to become the person that I am and give me the understanding of racism in the United States. And this involves the police as well. My youngest daughter, Mom, and I, which is she's a white woman, we were coming back from something and we were turning into the road that leads down to my house. And the police pulled in and pulled us over. And I'm wondering, what are they pulling us over for? And, their original excuse for pulling us over was that her headlight was out on her vehicle. And so they separated us. They had me in one vehicle. They had her in the other. And, they asked me where we're coming from and all those things like that. I didn't tell them where we were coming from. And, they checked me and all of that stuff like that. So, long story short, they let us go. And my girl get back in the car and she starts telling me all of these things that the police are saying to her, because remember, she's a white girl. And they're like, "What are you doing with this guy? And we thought you were Cedric. We thought he was Cedric Govan, and that's why we came. What are you doing with these people? You're better than that, and you shouldn't do this and do that." And I was like, wow, these guys don't even know me like that. I was never in trouble with the police like that. These are little Andy Griffith type cops. And I never, like I said, I never had run-ins with the police like that because, I was always doing my sports and stuff like that. So I was not around that much to get involved in a lot of the street stuff, to even have a name in the streets, period. So why the way they would come out and say things to her like that, as if I was a nuisance and a criminal, it had to be racially motivated. Because I wasn't Cedric Govan. They knew I wasn't Cedric Govan because of the run-in that we had before. And so these are just some experiences that I've been through in my life that have given me concrete evidence that people are malicious because of stereotypes that they bought into about black people, and they will die in their ignorance, man. And it hurts and crushes people, and it changes you as a person. It changes your heart. It changes your mind, changes everything, your outlook on life, your perception of reality. All of these things are tied into the experiences that you go through in life. And these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 experiences that I just named off for you guys are things that shape me to be the person that I am. And so I don't look at all white people as being this, but I do know that they are capable of this. Some people who have been taught wrong and who have accepted the error teaching of their parents and their grandparents and so forth are going to act this way towards you because they don't know any better. And that's when I relate to when Jesus was on the cross and he was like, forgive them for they know not what they do. If they really understood the spiritual circumstances that were brought about by their actions, then they wouldn't do the things that they do, because they'd understand that they're hurting themselves more than they were hurting the other person. So those are just some examples, and y'all, you're going to go through these things in your life as a Black person. It's inevitable. I don't know one Black person who haven't had an experience like that. And I hope we're coming into a time where everybody is blending with each other so much that these things are starting to happen less. But just know that right around the corner, racism is lurking, and it's waiting to break your heart. It's waiting to change your mind and sour you towards other people. But I urge you, do not take this out on a whole entire group of people for the actions of a few ignorant. This is your boy D-Mac. You know what I say, sticks and stones can break your bones, but the word can always heal you. I'm out.